An excellent wife, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. It is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. He will get wounds and dishonour, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation. He will refuse though you multiply gifts. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love.
Amen. Well, April the 14th, 1932 was a day that changed the world. Anyone know what happened on that day? Non-rhetorical question. April the 14th, 1932. No? Well, I didn't either. On that day, two physicists in a lab in Cambridge did something that meant the world was never going to be the same again. They split the atom. They split the atom, and nothing in our world has ever been the same since. In some ways, marriage is a little bit like splitting the atom. All right? It can have positives, and you can have nuclear medicine, and you can have big, environmentally friendly nuclear reactors producing warmth and heat and light. I'm stretching it, I know. Or you can have nuclear catastrophe. You can have nuclear bombs. Marriage in Proverbs is a little bit like that. And what Proverbs has got to say about marriage can be confronting. It's direct, but it's helpful, and it's certainly not PC in some ways. We'll look at it together. So, a couple of points. Firstly, marriage is a good gift from God, so be thankful for it. Marriage is a good gift from God, so be thankful for it. The bridal industry is booming, at least what I see. I think in this area more than others, perhaps. We see lots of weddings taking place, hired weddings, profile weddings, but actually marriage as an institution is going through some rough times. The number of marriages has declined by 50% since 1970 when you do that on a per capita basis. The average marriage is now 11 years. And there are a lot of reasons, I think, why marriage has gone through some tough times. One of those reasons today can be, why would you get married when you can kind of get the same things without like a lock-in contract with all of the implications of it? But also because there seems sometimes to be a sense that romance is beautiful and relationships are exciting. And as Ambrose Pierce puts it, love is kind of like a temporary insanity, and it's curable by marriage. So why would you do that? Just enjoy the relationship. Why would you get married? Proverbs actually says, and it's important to remember as well, whatever our own, if we're married and maybe things are great, or maybe they're not, or maybe there's challenges, that Proverbs insists that marriage is a gift from God. Listen to this. Proverbs 18:22. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. And listen to this. And obtains favor from the Lord. Listen to that last bit. It's actually, Proverbs says that if you find a wife, you find something that's good, yeah, okay, we got that, and you receive favor from the Lord. What does favor mean in the Bible? It means God's approval, His support, His blessing. And a world that would devalue marriage, Proverbs says marriage is good and God favors it. And you say, like, well, what if I'm not married? I don't get God's favor. Or what if I was married and I'm not married? Or, no, the Bible's got a lot to say about the beauty of singleness. And you can read that for yourself. Actually, I would probably say if you're going to weigh it up between marriage and singleness might even be better. But Proverbs insists that marriage is a gift from God. It's good. And there's a blessing from God in it. His favor is in it. Why? I don't know. Proverbs doesn't tell us exactly why marriage is favored by God. Those who are married are favored or blessed. I think it's because when you get married, whether you're married, marriage is good or difficult or it's in between, that you are committing to living in the way of wisdom in God's world. You're running with the grain. You know how wood's got a grain? And you can live against the grain or you can rub against the grain. Being married is with the grain. In all of its difficulties and complexities, you are owning responsibility. You are living in a way that God is pleased with. Hear me again, it's not the only way to live. But being married, Proverbs says, is good. And there's a favor and a blessing that comes with it. Jesus in Matthew 19 says this, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined together with his wife. You've heard that at wedding ceremonies, I'm sure, quoting Genesis, the beginning. But then he says, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So marriage is good. It's a gift from God. And your marriage and my marriage, or if you'll be married in the future, it's something that God is intimately interested in. God has joined them together, Jesus says. It's not a human, it's human. I fell in love and we got together. That happens, but if you could zoom out, you would see that God is actually in marriage. He joins a man and a woman together. Proverbs 19:14 says, houses and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. It's a gift of God. So firstly, marriage is good. So be thankful for it. That's Proverbs on marriage. Secondly, though, Proverbs, I'm looking around, I think we're pretty safe. Proverbs is very explicit. Marriage is sweet and it's sexual, so enjoy it. Proverbs is speaking to the young men, young teenage boys going into the world, and he says, marriage is sexual. And there are many Proverbs that speak to the reality of that. You don't need me to tell you that men and women, all of us are sexual beings. It's how God created us. It's a good thing. Proverbs speaks really directly, and it says, Proverbs 5 and 6, it says, there's a right way to express that sexuality as a wrong way. And Proverbs says, choose the right way. This is the right way. Listen, Proverbs 5, 1-6. My son, be attentive to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she's bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life, her ways wander, but she does not know it. Proverbs speaks about the reality that marriage is sexual, we're sexual beings, and there's a wrong way to use our sexuality. Proverbs speaks of the wrong way as the casual, recreational sex way. Proverbs says that that's living against the grain of God's world. And if we live against the grain of God's world in any area, we should get splintered. We will get splintered. And we live now in a world that has adopted this as normative, that sexuality can be part of marriage. It can also be expressed in all sorts of other different ways. And it doesn't really matter, the world says. Proverbs says, no. There is a wrong way, and that's recreational, casual, sexual encounters. And the splinters are there. If you live in our world, which we do, and you look around, the splinters are there. There's a recent New York Times article, which I read, and it did a very in-depth survey of thousands and thousands of young millennials on their sexual experience. It was a It was a confidential survey, so people were honest. And the results that came back were actually very interesting. It revealed that there was an increasing dissatisfaction with the sexual encounters of millennials, especially women. And I would encourage you to read this article. It's not a Christian article. It's like New York Times and secular. But there was some very interesting quotes. Like one that struck me was from a young woman. She said this: "We don't really like each other in person. We literally can't sit down and have a coffee together." And she's speaking about we're sexually involved with each other, but she goes on to say we need to be drunk in order to actually relate to it. And then she wonders perhaps why the sexual intimacy is not what she would hope it would be. You see, she's like many other millennials following the script the world tells them and discovering that it's actually like a mirage, that the casual recreational sex is not the best sex. And look, I want to say that sexuality can be complicated. It is complicated, not can be. It is complicated for all of us, married or not married. It's a complicated thing. Humans are complicated. But interestingly, to me, is the research done in the United States, and I don't know if it's the same yet, suspect it might be, which consistently finds that the most satisfied people in their sexual relationships are trendy young millennials. No, it's actually middle-aged, married, evangelical Christians. That surprising you? There you go. That's what the stats apparently showed. I did say sex is complicated for everybody, all right? So let's not go too far. But it's not just dissatisfying the view of recreational sex. Proverbs says that it's not linear according to God's grain, and it's actually much more satisfying is one thing, but it's actually deeply hurtful. And I'm not going to speak about the consequences of things like abortions and STDs, but casual sex causes pain to real people. We can say that sexuality is just another bodily function that doesn't matter, and people don't get hurt, but they do. And they're deeply hurt. And one of the reasons for this is that in the last decade or so, medical research in this area is discovering that a lot more happens in our sexuality than we understood previously. For example, it's recently been discovered that when a woman has sexual relations, her body releases a hormone called oxytocin. I'm not a doctor, but apparently oxytocin is the same hormone that's released when she breastfeeds. And that hormone creates a bonding process with the child that she's rearing, helping a woman deal with a very difficult little person. And it apparently releases the same hormone in a woman's body, helping a woman deal with a very difficult man that she's related to. It's a chemical reaction. There's a different chemical that's released when a man has sexual relations. It's called vasopressin. And vasopressin's been dubbed the monogamy molecule. The monogamy molecule creates in a man a desire to protect and care for the woman that he's having sexual relationships with. It's one recent sex therapist said, when we create intercourse, or when we have intercourse, we create an involuntary chemical commitment. And so we can say that sexuality is unimportant. The Proverbs says it's actually a really big deal. It's good and it's sweet. Enjoy it. But there are ways to do it, and casual sex is not it. Proverbs describes casual sex in chapter 5, verse 16. It says, "Should your springs be scattered abroad? Streams of water running it in the street?" Proverbs says that casual sex is like a Middle Eastern marketplace. Some of you have been there. Dirty, dusty, and you can imagine a stream of water running through, maybe like this. It gets muddy, and people trample on it. And Proverbs says, fight the thing, no. Let your springs be for yourself alone, not for strangers with you. And it goes on to speak about that the wrong way of sex is casual sex, the right way is within marriage. And we heard that reading before, the Louis read for us from Proverbs, which must have made the Victorians blush. I imagine like a Jane Austen kind of clergyman reading out, let her fill you at all times with be intoxicated by love. Let's get on. I don't know how they cope with that. But Proverbs is very direct and very real. I don't know if we need to explain the imagery any further. Proverbs says, sex within marriage is a good gift. I would be thankful for it. All right. Thirdly, marriage is good. So be thankful. Marriage, the sexual part of marriage is sweet, and so enjoy it. Thirdly, marriage is vulnerable. So be careful with it. Proverbs has got a lot to say about the difficulties of a marriage relationship, and we'll look at some of those in a sec. But one of them it speaks about is the sexual vulnerability. We are sexual beings. Proverbs is very direct, and the parent speaking to those young sons going into the world says this: "So you'll be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house sinks down to death, and her paths to the departed. None who go back to her come back, nor do they regain the paths of mine." Adultery is in many senses now just the affair. Everyone has one eventually. Marriage is difficult. The Proverbs speaks about adultery, sexual relationships outside marriage for married people as devastating. In fact, Proverbs speaks about adultery as the epitome of folly. Proverbs speaks about wise living in God's world and foolish living, and adultery is the epitome of foolish living against the grain of God's world. As a Proverb 27 verse 8 says, "Like a bird that strays from its nest is a man who strays from his home." Very vivid. You can imagine one of these trees and there's a bird's nest. Maybe you've seen it in your garden and you walk out and you see the little dead birds underneath the nest. Proverbs says, it's like what it is for a man to leave his home. It's devastating. We think we want to be happy and we want to have real experiences, and this other person can give it to us. And folly says, yes, that's the way to go. Proverbs says it's not. It brings you death. So be on your guard against adultery. The sexual temptation to be involved with someone who is not your spouse. It's real, Proverbs says. And doing marriages, I remember doing actually a couple of marriages here in this church. And at that time, you could never imagine that you'd be sexually vulnerable to another person. But Proverbs says it's true. That's how we're wired. So be careful of it. Polly calls us. And this is not in the Bible, and so I'm going to be very brief and careful. But I think it's fair to say that men and women are different, right? And that I think our temptations in this area of adultery are different too. It tends to be that for women, adultery seems to present to the man that listens, that understands, that communicates, that is romantic. For men, it tends to be more visually orientated. Generally, stereotypically, it tends to be a visual thing. Someone who is available or presenting themselves as available. And so, two quick points as we think about the vulnerability of marriage to adultery. Husbands, love your wives. That's an easy one. Have conversations with her. Be interested in her. Listen to her. Learn what her love language is and use it. Be creative. And I can speak as a bloke. I know it's 100% true. We know how to do it because we did it to begin with. We knew how to win our wives, and we did it very effectively to help safeguard your marriage. Husbands, love your wives. Keep doing it. And wives, Proverbs says that your sexuality is a beautiful gift from God to your marriage. You might feel unattractive and uncompared, especially compared with all the airbrushed images that you see out there. Maybe you think I'm not who I once was. Proverbs says that sexual part of your marriage is beautiful. It's a gift from God, and it's right to invest in it. All right, fourth. Marriage can destroy you, so choose carefully who you marry. And remember this, the context is the young boys going out, or the teenage boys going out into the world. And Proverbs has got a lot to say about choosing your marriage partner wisely. Proverbs 19:13 says, "The foolish son is a ruin to his father, and a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. There's a few of these. 21:9, it's better to live in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. 21:19, it's better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. Now, it's been wisely pointed out to me that the woman that you married wasn't like that when you married her, or you wouldn't have married her. She would have been fretful and quarrelsome. So what's the common denominator of the fact that she's like that now? You are. And there's some truth in that. We men can make our wives quarrelsome and fretful. I could get an amen from some of the women here. My wife's in Queensland, so you can't hear it all that way. But there is a reality of that. Now, marriage can be difficult. Proverbs is so realistic, right? That you can be in that situation in your marriage where it's just really difficult. But there is also the reality that it's not all a man's fault that there could be a quarrelsome nature in the house. It's also, Proverbs is addressing, saying very specifically that it takes two to tango. And it's speaking about that marriage can become very difficult when there's that kind of thing going on. And Proverbs will say again and again that when you choose your marriage partner, young sons, right? Teenage sons. In fact, I've got three of them. So I've got three of them. And they're going out into the world, and Dada, my wife, and I talking to them about how to choose a marriage partner. Proverbs says that there's one thing that is more important than anything else in choosing a marriage partner. And the reality for my sons is that that's not always what they think about. What do they think about when they're looking for a marriage partner? They're looking, what are her legs like? What color is her hair? Is she kind of cool? And, is a whole bunch of other stuff that what does she look like on Instagram? The whole Proverbs says that sort of stuff, it's not unimportant, but it's not that important. What is important, Proverbs says, is character. Character is key. So choosing a marriage partner, character trumps everything. There's a very evocative proverb. I would say it's my favorite proverb, but it's not. But it's very evocative. Proverbs 11:22 says, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. Very evocative, isn't it? A beautiful woman being like a gold ring in, like a big pig. You get the image, right? The gold ring is trumped by the rest of the outfit. And Proverbs says, character is what counts. Proverbs 31 says, charm's deceitful, beauty's fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So Proverbs has got a lot to say about choosing your marriage partner. There's choose wisely. Character is king. I remember when I was in the process of choosing my wife, Stana, we were at a camp together, and I came in late in the night, and she didn't know that I'd arrived there. And I got up early and I stuck my head out of the tent, and I could see Dada. She had some heavy buckets of water, and my grandfather was sort of laboring along, and she came in and she lifted the bucket. Sort of like, yeah, there's a woman of character. She tells the story that when she first met me, she came to our family farm, and we've got one of those doors that shut on the automatic spring. And apparently I just walked through the door and shut her in the face. But character is him, right? Choose carefully who you marry. Looks, lots of stuff, it comes and it goes. Proverbs chapter 31 describes an excellent character called the Proverbs 31 woman. I'm not going to go into it now, but read that. You see there, you don't see much talk about skin complexion or scales, what she weighs on the scales, but you see a lot about her character. Proverbs 31, 28, 29 says, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all because of her character. All right, two final things. Then we're done. Number one, tell you what they're going to be, a challenge and a grade. So the challenge, said Proverbs would say that marriage is like splitting the atom. When you are married, everything changes forever in terms of your relationship. And the reality is that when we think about the positive nuclear medicine and we think of power and warmth and light, and a marriage is good and sweet and fruitful, and we think of the other extreme, which is nuclear catastrophe. Most of us who are married right now, we're somewhere on that spectrum between what is really, really good and sweet and what is really difficult and hard and destructive. And Proverbs would say, though, that none of us are static. By that I mean that no one is in the same point all the time and you're going to be there for the rest of your life. Proverbs would say that you're moving towards folly or you're moving towards wisdom. And it's true in your marriage as it's true with everything else. We're all going one direction or the other. And the challenge to you from Proverbs would be, make an effort to be going in the right direction. If you're married, make an effort to go in that right direction. And that can be a big thing of it is read Proverbs on how to live wisely. And I'm speaking to myself here as much as anybody else. Marriage can be difficult. There are times when we communicate incorrectly, when we live with each other in a way that is not helpful. Marriage can be really hard, but the challenge is that you're going to go one direction or the other. Don't go towards the nuclear catastrophe. No one wins. But instead, even incrementally, get some help, get some counseling, get alongside others in the church community, the small gospel communities. I know you've got really healthy ones here at the Serpade Coast. Just seek in God's world as you live wisely to grow in your marriage. That's the challenge. The grace, though, is this. I just know that in any group of people of this size, we're going to have so many different experiences of this topic of marriage. For some of us, maybe we have been married and it hasn't gone well. Others of us are married and it's really difficult. So others of us are married and it's going really sweetly. That is awesome. It's great. And some of us want to be married and we're not, and we aren't able to be for a number of reasons. Like this topic of marriage brings up, it's close to our heart because Proverbs says it's a really important part of life. And the grace that I want to leave you with this morning is that whether or not your marriage is flourishing and beautiful, or whether it's in a really difficult spot, the grace of God given to you in Jesus Christ transforms you. Let me explain. In the Bible, and again, this is not, I'm gonna have to step out of Proverbs just for a moment, but in Ephesians 5, a New Testament letter, Paul says that a marriage is actually an image of something that's far bigger and better. It's an image of the love of Jesus Christ, God's only Son, for his people, the church. So our human marriages reflect a greater beauty and a greater wonder. And the grace is this. The grace is that you and I, whether in our marriage and everyone else, we continually fall short. Our best efforts fall short. And it can be easy on a topic like this to go away and think, like, my marriage is in trouble. This is just feel judgment and weight, or my marriage failed, or, and feel the weight. And the evil one would want you to do that, because he comes to steal and kill and destroy. But Jesus says, I've come that they might have life and have it to the full. And so the reality, the grace that we have is that a human marriage points to a greater reality, and that greater reality is the gospel. The fact that you and I can't meet up to God's standards, but in Jesus Christ, he's paid the price. And whatever your marriage is like, and whatever topics come up with this, in Jesus Christ, what you don't have in your marriage is a shadow of what you have in him. What you don't have in your marriage is a shadow of what you really do have in him. And that will last for all eternity. So hear the grace. Hear the grace of the gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ for all of life, but also for this area of marriage. Listen to Revelation chapter 19. This is how the Bible ends. 19, chapter 6, verse 10. Then I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, crying out, Hallelujah! For the Lord our God, the Almighty, reigns. Let's rejoice and exult and be glad together and give him the glory. Listen to this. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. And the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true words of God. Did you hear that? White and pure, invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. Whether you're single, and you're married, you have been married, you're divorced, you're alone, whatever it might be, in Jesus Christ, you are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. Each and every one of it. That incredible day when the reality which marriage just points forward to will be fulfilled forever and ever and ever and ever. Amen. Let's pray.